G'day and thanks for joining us for another Australia Talks. I'm DK and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Ardeet. Today is Thursday, the 20th of August, 2026. And our topics this week are perhaps electrification as our way of permanent fuel security. And a Chinese research vessel has sparked alarm in Palau and what that means for Australia. Of course, we have our Two Ticks Town Talk, and then we'll jump into This Week in Australian History, and we'll finish off, as always, with a 4X bottle top trivia. This week's trivia is ocean-themed, so stick around for that. But before we get into all of that, let's catch up on the last week. Ardeet, hello. How well do you know your ocean facts?
Not well. But we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. So a lot less echoey. Back to my normal recording spot. So thanks to mates of the podcast who bore with us for that bit of an echoey spot that I had when I was down in Tassie on Bruny Island. A lovely location though. But yeah, listening back to it was funny. I was in the same room, and I don't know what caused it, but sometimes it was more echoey than others, and I got to say I'm a bit puzzled by that. But I'm sure someone who's got better audio knowledge might be able to tell me something. I'm guessing maybe some levels, depending on my volume, pick things up or change the sensitivity of the mic. But yeah, I found it a bit odd having a bit of a listen back that some of it was less echoey than others, but I should look that up.
Yeah. I would say it was unusual because I was like, are you moving into a bathroom or something?
Right. Yeah, because DK had asked me before we started where I was and what the story was. But yeah, back up here in almost colder Mornington Peninsula than what it was down there. Look, it's comparable, but I was a bit surprised down there. So yeah, we've this week we've moved into the wonderful world of the induction cooktop. Actually, we got got a induction cooktop, replace the gas cooktop. Look, I like the gas. And I do most of the cooking, but Mrs. Ardeet, it's constantly been a thing of cleaning it because she'll often do the kitchen and that anyway. It's trickier to clean. Didn't bother me quite as much, but and look, induction's changed so much from how it used to be 20 years ago when it was just, to me, no way would I touch it. But now it's basically as responsive as gas, and so I've cooked a few things on it already, and yeah, definitely very happy with the move to it. Although we also replaced the dishwasher. The old dishwasher, it was fine except for the bloody controls. When the controls were done in such a way that it was like a touch sensitive thing, almost like not quite capacitive. It was a film over the buttons. But what it meant was if a bit of moisture got in, you couldn't use the buttons. And as it's gotten older, it gets more and more susceptible to the moisture. And my fix has been to basically get a knife, like just a blunt cutlery knife, sort of lever open just underneath the membrane, and then stand there with a hairdryer for about 5 minutes, drying it out to operate it again. And of course, it always happens. You just I'll put the dishwasher on before I go to bed. You put it on and think, oh God, and you think, bloody hell, get the thing out there, standing there thinking, the novelty's wearing off on this. So we did get that replaced, although unfortunately, it was all in there. Miss Ardeet came out and she said, there's a little bit of a dent in the front. So the guys that unpacked it carefully, I'd seen them. So there must have been something happening in the factory. And also there was a little bit of lining underneath that wasn't sort of glued properly. It was sticky, but you pushed it on and stay up there for 15 minutes or something, and then it would just slowly come away again. So it was Fisher and Paykel we got. They sent the tech over, and he had a look at it. He said, "Look, he said the door's easy to replace, but he said that insulation stuff or that lining stuff is wrapped around the entire unit. If it's peeling off there at the front, it could well be peeling off inside." So he called up his support thing. They said, "No, we'll just replace it." So they're going to come out and replace it. So we're using it, and it's a pain in the neck, but it's in many ways we're lucky that it was there at the front and that it happened, rather than find out, after a year or two that's there's something gone wrong there. So yeah, so nice to have the new dishwasher, but good to have very groovy to have the new induction. I went through all the pots and pans, got rid of the ones that don't work with the induction, so I just went down to Minimax today and grabbed a couple of ones to make up for that. So I'm all set. So, yeah, that's what's been keeping me busy. What about you?
You have been busy.
Yeah. And do you use induction at all?
We do. We got an induction cooktop, probably about 2 years ago. It was just a cheap one that I sort of measured the existing. We just had one of the ceramic cooktops, and they take forever to heat up. Like, they're fine. It worked fine, but it just kind of really always irked me and more my wife, because she does a bit more cooking than I do. And it was just the time it took for everything just to heat up. It's very inefficient, uses a lot of power, all those sorts of things. Yeah. And I think it was one Black Friday or something. There was a deal. And a very good deal, mind you, and for not a lot of money, I gotta look for the deals. For not a lot of money, literally, I think it was about $300, $400. It was wow. what I thought was very affordable.
Bloody oath.
And we got one that perfectly fit. It had the same dimensions as the existing cooktop, so we didn't need to change anything. You do in Australia, you do need to have an electrician come and rewire it in, which is a little bit frustrating, but anyway. So we got that, and what a dream. The difference in performance is night and day, like completely different. I remember as a test, we just put some water in a pot, cranked it up to the highest level, and was like, let's see how quick it takes to boil it. And I think previously it had taken something like 5 or 6 minutes. And on for like a centimetre of water in a small pot sort of thing. And in this new one, it was like under a minute, it had already started forming bubbles and stuff like that. Like, it was just an incredible difference. And the thing is instead of just heating the element, which then heats the pot, it heats the pot directly, the metal directly, which is incredible. As far as I'm concerned, it's bloody magic. And the beauty as well is once you take it off, there will be a bit of that residual heat on the sort of the glass on top, but it's not getting hot itself, So if you accidentally turn it on or something like that, it's not going to get hot. It's not going to burn your house down, all of those sorts of things. And actually, the one we have, and I would imagine most of them are the same, is if it doesn't detect that there's something that it can heat up, it basically turns itself off. So very, very safe. Particularly if you've got like young kids or something like that around, or someone with a disability that you do need to be mindful and careful of those sorts of things, or you're just a bit clumsy or something like that, So from a safety point of view and a efficiency point of view. So we're about to build a new house in the new year, and it's not even a conversation. It's 100%.
Which one do you get?
Yeah, it's which induction cooktop are we going for? You can get really fancy, and they'll put them in the bench tops themselves and things like that. So it doesn't even look like there's a cooktop there. I'm not a huge fan of that look because I don't mind the idea that my kitchen is a kitchen and it has kitchen appliances and things like that in it. So we're definitely not going to go to that level. I feel like the expense is not really worth the look in my mind. But hey, if that's your cup of tea, so be it. But yeah, we'll definitely get a nice big one. And spend a little bit more money. Hopefully I can find another deal, but I'm not holding my breath. But yeah, a massive upgrade. Definitely one of those little quality of life upgrades that I think is worth doing. If you've been on the fence for a while, I think it's definitely worth doing. And I know there are, since we purchased ours, some of them are actually become quite affordable these days as well. So you probably don't have to hunt like I did for a really good deal.
Oh, I had pushed. I've been a fan of gas for a long time. I just loved how responsive it was because you made that comment about the ceramic and even the old. I don't know whether you ever cooked on one of the old just electric stoves.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, the gas was just. Yeah, great. So I was very resistant to induction for quite a while until I think we'd gone on a holiday somewhere. It was either an Airbnb or a hotel, and that it had a reasonably new induction, and I used it. I thought, this is just a completely different experience to what it used to be. This is as good as gas on the response for me, and in fact, arguably in some ways, it's quicker. So, yeah, I after that I didn't really sort of take a hell of a lot of convincing. I didn't sort of have much of a pushback. So, yes, and that switch you made and I thought, God, it was one of those things that, of course, once it was explained, it had to be an isolation switch. So I said to the Sparky, why do we have to have it? And he said, because it's over 10 amps, and anything that's over 10 amps, you've got to have an isolation switch. And he said, like your oven's got one, and it has to be there and visible, because he said if something's going wrong with the unit because of the power draw and what it is, safety-wise, you have to be able to just turn it off immediately rather than sort of, run out and hopefully find the power board or damn it, what do you call the thing where all the power switches?
Yeah, the fuse box.
Yeah, I don't know if they still call it fuse box, but yeah, the fuse, yeah. So rather than having to run out there and flip off the switch, the safety things are if you see something wrong, you have to be able to just flick it off. I thought, wow,
that does make sense. Yeah,
never realised that before. So yeah, so there you go.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad you've come to the dark side.
Yeah.
And got away from gas. Because the other thing is, for a lot of our listeners probably don't know this, whether you're an Aussie, but particularly I would imagine our international listeners probably don't realise that gas in Australia, as much as we export a lot of gas, you now in certain states, and it wouldn't surprise me if this does become Australia-wide, you actually cannot hook up gas for cooking for a new build. So it's kind of, if you've got it, you can keep it. But if you want to do anything with it, you've got to whip it out. And one of the reasons for that, and we have spoken about this before, so I won't go into too much detail, but one of the reasons for that is there is a lot of respiratory problems with, you don't really think of the gas as, the exhaust of the gas that much affecting you, but unfortunately it does, and some people are particularly sensitive to it, particularly young children. So look, you can cook outside with gas in an open air environment, you can still get barbecues and all those sorts of things, but it is something to be mindful of. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't put their extraction hoods on and things like that when they probably should, and so on and so forth. So the government, big our nanny government has said, nah, come on, no more fun for you. So it's a bit disappointing, but anyway.
That's right. No, that's good. So now we're fully electrified.
Speaking of electrification, Australia is spending billions on our fuel security. But what if we could use some of that to electrify? The war in Iran has kicked off the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market so far, and it's also drawn attention to something invisible to most Australians, that we use a hell of a lot of diesel to keep this country running. Per capita, we consume 7.67 barrels of diesel, or 1,219 litres per year per person. That is the highest diesel consumption intensity of any major economy. That's 32% more diesel per capita than Saudi Arabia, who is notoriously a gas-guzzling country. And that's 83% more than our American cousins. 700% more than the average Chinese. So yeah, we got a little bit of a problem when it comes to diesel. We're diesel addicts, from mining to growing food, as I like to call it, trains, trucks, and tractors. Diesel is needed in all our economic sectors. There are only about 27 million of us. But living on this vast continent, it is unsurprising that transporting goods swallows the biggest portion of our fuel. The impact of the war has been felt immediately. I probably don't need to tell that to most of you, as builders complained about delivery prices and groceries became even more expensive than they already were. We currently have, as of recording, 37 days of diesel in the national stockpile, but the government is spending big to increase that number. This year's federal budget included $11.9 billion national fuel security plan, with $3.2 billion of that to physically actually stockpile diesel and jet fuel as well. The $1 billion fuel security package aims to increase Australia's fuel reserves to last for at least 50 days. But, I mean, that's well and good, but maybe we're focusing on the wrong issue. Maybe we should instead, perhaps, just possibly, think about how we might be less dependent on diesel. Ha ha ha, I hear you say. DK, that's impossible. Well, maybe it's actually not. Francis Veerboom, chief executive of the non-profit renewable advocacy group Rewiring Australia, they said that Australia has an obvious problem. He said, quote, Australia has a fuel crisis because so many of its machines still rely on fossil fuels. The long-term fix for this, where we won't have inflation built into our groceries, where we won't be beholden to whatever's happening around the globe, is if we run on Australian-made electricity. What we need to do is think about how much at each moment that a fossil fuel machine breaks down, we end up replacing it with an electric one, end quote. Yet electrification of our trucking industry doesn't basically get a look in at all. The only measure in the fuel security plan was a $40 million allocation to electrify Australia Post's delivery fleet, which isn't even 1% of the total package. And to be fair, a lot of Australia Post's delivery fleet already is electrified, with the postie bikes being phased out over the last few years. And you've probably seen the little, I don't know what you call them, little tricycle-looking things zipping around. Those are all electric. So aside from the fuel security plan, a tax break to encourage electrification of passenger vehicles has so far cost the government a whopping $3.3 billion in revenue and will cost another $2.8 billion by the 2028-2029 financial year, which is a lot of money. But when we put it into the context of how much fuel we're buying and stockpiling, it really isn't that much. There is a groundswell in Australia. Almost a year ago, we spoke about the slow uptake of EVs on this very podcast, with electric vehicles making up only 7.5% of new car sales. And at the time, we sort of celebrated that. However, this year, by May, that figure had hit a record high of 23%, and it was rising. Most of that was due basically to the rising cost of fuel and the fear that consumers had, not just about its pricing, but its availability as well. And I think at the time we said something, when we spoke about EV uptake being so low, I think we said something would happen that would trigger a bigger uptake. And well, I don't like to say we told you so, but we did. And I'm now kicking myself going, I should have bought a bloody EV. But anyway.
Wow.
It's easier. In hindsight's 2020, isn't it? So if we remember it's trucks, trains, and tractors, how hard is it actually to electrify our transport and freight? That's the big question that the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, aka ARENA, was interested in when it commissioned a report into electrifying trucking. As always, you will find this report in the show notes. It is a fascinating but dry read. It found it is much easier and much more achievable to electrify transport with shorter distances around urban centres first. This is what the delivery industry calls last mile delivery. These are the light commercial or medium rigid vehicles that travel shorter distances and then return to base. And basically the idea is those return to base hours overnight can be used to charge them in their depots. Industry officials say that electric versions of trucks that deliver your groceries and do most of the deliveries in our cities now cost roughly the same as a similar sized diesel truck. Climate Council analyst Ben McLeod explains, quote, electric trucks have started to reach a really exciting tipping point. We've seen some really interesting proposals that suggest that a $3 billion package over 5 years could support anywhere from 30,000 to 50,000 new electric trucks, end quote. ARENA's report found that 98% of transport operators were small to medium enterprises and had a mean profit margin of just 2%. And 70% of them only had one truck, which a subsidy of $3 billion would be enough to cover roughly 20% of the light truck fleet in the country. So 1 in 5 trucks with a $3 billion incentive could be replaced with EVs. And subsidizing the EV transition is a proven model that Helen Rowe from the nonprofit ClimateWorks Centre thinks should help kickstart the rollout of electric trucks. She explains, quote, we've seen with EVs that once you sort of get out of the starting blocks, people are trying them, they're talking to their neighbours about what the EVs are like. There's going to be a bit of a transition on how we roll them out, how different if it's a delivery business where they're going to put a charging infrastructure on their site. There's a bit of that kind of change that needs to be navigated, end quote. And the most complicated part of road freight is not the urban delivery trucks carrying your online grocery shops. It's actually the long distance freight, the massive road trains traversing thousands of rural kilometers. This is really the big problem. Because as we've just explained, you know, these small 5 to 10 ton trucks that you see zipping around every city, every town in Australia, delivering goods. You know, maybe you've ordered something from eBay or AliExpress. The postman turns up in his little truck and delivers it to you. Those trucks can easily be replaced today with EVs. They're going home at the end of the night. They can be charged, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to be suitable for everyone, and there definitely is problems and challenges, but that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. Electric prime movers are still 2 to 3 times the upfront cost of their fuel-powered equivalents. And the big problem here is weight. There are weight restrictions, and obviously, batteries are heavier than fuel in fuel tanks, and fuel tanks, thankfully, have the benefit of getting lighter as they use the fuel. EVs don't have that benefit. So once you get a big battery, you now are being able to carry less freight. However, there are big benefits in focusing on this part of the sector, according to energy analyst David Litch. Articulated trucks make up just over 3% of Australia's freight, yet they gobble up about a third of all the diesel used across all sectors. Electric trucks could reduce those running costs by 60 to 70%, which over time dwarfs the upfront cost. David Litch explains, quote, long haul is where the diesel's consumed. So that's where the economics matter the most. If you look at a B double, that's roughly cost $1 to go a kilometre on diesel. It costs 30 cents to do the same trip on electricity, end quote. And that's absolutely huge. His modelling suggests that electric long-haul trucks could cut fuel costs by 47 to 71%, depending on the route. And he's calculated that a B double travelling 100,000 kilometres a year could save up to $73,000 annually, and that the extra upfront costs could be recouped within 3 to 4 years. But, and that's a big but, the big issue other than the weight is the infrastructure. Electrifying road freight report commissioned by Arena in the show notes estimates that at least 165 megawatt charging hubs would need to be built across the country to support the electrification of the country's road freight. Based on global data, Mr. Litch calculated that a megawatt scale grid connected truck charging hub with 20 to 50 bays would cost somewhere between $35 to $85 million a piece.
Ooh.
That's before accounting for any additional costs. And we know that this is Australia. They'll probably cost $1 billion each and spend 5 years going overrun. Using Arena's numbers with Mr. Litch's cost estimates, a countrywide network would cost between 6 and 14 billion, double that for reality. But these are big numbers, but this is basically a similar cost to what we're currently allocating for our fuel security measures already. So it's not that there's not room in the budget, it's just how we're allocating the funds. But I'd argue this sort of thing is exactly what the government should basically invest in, not just pay for, but I think this could be done on a long-term investment sort of strategy. The government can own it, roll out the infrastructure, and then reap the profit over a period of time and then sell it on. They did the exact same thing with telegraph cables. And of course, if those that are old enough that remember Telecom, which became Telstra back in the day, we could do the same sort of idea here. It may be politically unpopular because it smells like communism, but we've done it before and we can do it again. If we start small, focus on big transport corridors where the majority of our trucks go, and then expand from there. Mr. Litch calculates that just electrifying Sydney to Melbourne for B-double trucks could be done under $5 billion, and that would put a pretty big dent in our diesel requirements. So, Ardeet, the question I have for you is, should we keep throwing money at foreign fossil fuels, or should we transition away to a more homegrown approach?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily an either or. I think it's something to be done in conjunction. I like the concept. I do like the fact that they're targeting or seem to be targeting the last mile as a sensible place to start those sort of smaller deliveries once you brought sort of the long haul stuff in to the actual city. That's something that you don't really need a whole lot of infrastructure. You basically just need a charger at the distribution point. So I thought that was a good idea. The reality is that of big transport is that the huge trucks and ships and planes and tractors, it's still a diesel powered reality. And that's why we still have to take into account what we need for our fuel reserve. The number of times, we've mentioned a number of times over the years about how when the trucks stop moving, things just disappear from the shelves, and that's something that's important to social cohesion. So we still have to cater for that, still have to be prepared to have that in reserve and not get captured by an ideology. So that's why I say the two of them have to be done in tandem if they're going to happen. Look, money-wise, a billion here, a billion there. You're talking real money. The old thing there. It's still a lot of money. It's still taxpayer money. However, in terms of what we're spending for defence and other infrastructure, it's not an excessively high amount. Assuming, and look, that's with all the things that you've been talking about, they're assumptions, and sometimes these assumptions are a little bit rosy, particularly when you're talking about stuff like climate change and environment and all that. The figures often get looked at through rose-coloured glasses. However, they had arguments for them. So you do the normal mental calculation. Well, what is it if it was doubled? You sort of fell into that a bit yourself with, they said this will be it for the highway infrastructure, but you may as well bump it up to what, I can't remember what the figures were, but both of us expect it's going to be a lot more than what it is. The advantage of something like this, though, is that you can actually start the project in bits and pieces. You can do that last mile. You can look at it and you can say, well, look, let's target Sydney to Melbourne for the long haul and try it and see how it goes and create a model. You might find out you have to do it a bit differently for some of the other routes based on what you've learned. But to me, it's an inevitable way to go. Once you have a prime mover, or even a local delivery truck over onto EV, you eliminate a big cost with the fuel. I mean, you still have to pay for electricity, but people forget that EVs aren't free to fill up. You're still paying for electricity, and that probably is the biggest sticking point I would make on this. What tended to get omitted from a number of this is where the actual electricity comes from. Now, I can hear people yelling out saying, oh, solar will do it or renewables do it. They will certainly contribute. But until our power generation infrastructure is bumped up a hell of a lot more, we're still going to be burning fossil fuels in order to supply the electricity for these EVs. And look, that's fine. We've got plenty. We've got gas that we can use, which is sort of a cleaner burning one. We've still got some coal plants out there, and unpopular opinion, but we've got plenty of coal until we get these things ratcheted up and we get renewables catching up. I think there's still an argument for keeping them going. In fact, I would say there's an argument still for building a few of them. We take lesson from China, who's good at these long-term planning things, and they're doing coal as well as the renewables, as well as nuclear, as well as other fossil fuels out there. So that's my personal opinion. We have to have an energy mix. However, at the moment, it's not just something magic. Oh, you do an EV truck and suddenly there's no emissions. The emissions come further up the line, but even pollution-wise and just sheer economics, that keeps getting better and better for electrifying things like this. The EV trucks, like the big prime movers, as you commented in the thing, that the local delivery ones are at a tipping point where really it's just it costs about the same amount to get an EV, a smaller EV delivery truck, as what it does for internal combustion engine one. So it becomes a much easier decision. The big prime movers, though, they will inevitably hit that tipping point. And the reason they'll hit that tipping point is because it's very easy to understand how people are going to be incentivized to profit from this particular part of the industry. If you can, these massive costs of trucks and that, they do get amortized over a number of years, and you're dealing with customers who can see the benefits of 5, 10, 15, 20% savings because they've got a slightly longer term outlook than, say, the regular car buyers and that. And they've got that benefit of the outlook, which means you've then got a lot of people who are in that sector who understand how profitable it is going to be for them if they can provide something. They say, yeah, it's going to take you a couple of years longer than what it is, but after that, look how much you're going to save. And it becomes a very black and white practical thing. So to me, this is an inevitable inevitable evolution, which means the infrastructure, you know my opinion on a lot of the government spending. However, I can see the argument that this falls into I don't know if I'd say necessary investment, but an easily justifiable investment by the government, particularly trialling it. As you said, they might be able to sell it off. Maybe they hang on to it, who knows. But we're talking about something that goes through a sort of grey area into what's basically a defence question. We're seeing, I know at the moment we've got the fuel suppliers are pretty good, and let's hope they stay that way and things get better. But it has highlighted how exposed we are to a shortcoming we have here in Australia with regards to the own fuel that produce and our own fuel that refine. So that's why something like these actually do become a serious defence question, because if you don't have social cohesion and you lose social cohesion because things aren't getting delivered, you have a problem within the populace that is also a defence issue, particularly if it's in the time that you're getting pressured from an external force. So, even a cynic like me can be convinced of the need to see the government dip their hand into the pocket and at least fund some larger trials. So, look, all up, DK, I like the idea. I'm positive on them doing this in addition to the fixing up the fuel reserves, and I do think it's an inevitability. And as an inevitability, we need to work out the smartest way to actually get there, and the most cost-effective way. So, what about you? Do you think it's an either or with the EVs and fuel security? What's your opinion of how much involvement the government has to have in this, and what's your forecast for the long distance hauling?
I think it's a transition, right? It's not a either. It's we moving from one to another. Right now, we have a situation where we have a majority diesel powered economic base, and we need to transition that to electrification, basically. But there'll always be room for diesel. There will always be holdouts for or specific circumstances where diesel is better for one reason or another. But I see this as like tools in a toolbox, right? For a long time, fossil fuels have been cheap, readily available. The battery technology just hasn't been there, and so on and so forth. And look, yes, there is political reasons. You're a fool to not see that for what it is. You've got very large, very powerful fossil fuel or energy industry that's in their best interest to continue this process of extraction and sale of these products, right? But the writing's on the wall for everyone. We're moving into this direction, whether you like it or not. You can stand there and go, I'm a global warming denier or a skeptic, whatever you want to call yourself, and be a stick in the mud and say, no, I'm going to keep burning it until the day I die. Cool. You're allowed to do that. Until you're not. But realistically speaking, I think anyone that's alive today will probably be able to continue to do that. It may continue to get very expensive. There are certain fuels that are expensive for like race cars and things like that. You can purchase them not from a regular retailer, but you can still purchase them. They are expensive, but you can get them. And I think that will be the case if we fast forward 50, 100 years down the track. Oh, I've got a classic car. It needs fossil fuels, you can probably still go and get it, but it will be more of a niche product. It'll be much, much more expensive than it is today, and so on and so forth, because it will be rarer because the market's not there. And I think the government does have a role to play in this transition. They've already started doing this with the consumer transition, and the fact that it's picked up so much steam in the last 12 months, mostly because of the shutting of the Strait of Hormuz, is consumers are seeing the benefit. Electric and hybrid electric vehicles are pretty damn good these days. And so I had a mate actually talk to me this morning about how he was traveling down to Brisbane to go and have a look at the Tesla showroom to look at purchasing a Tesla. And he's the sort of person that I never in my life would have thought would. 5 years ago, you said, you're a homosexual if you have an EV or something like that. This is the sort of guy we're talking about, right? So I never ever would have thought that he would be excited to go and try an EV, because it's just not really like the sort of person that he was. But even he can see the benefits. And so, if he can figure it out, I think the writing's on the wall for fossil fuels long term.
Plus, he's not just. I'm sorry to jump in there, but you said too. You made a couple of good points there. He's seen how it's changed, and he's seen what the benefits of it, and what a nice choice it actually is. So it's actually, if you're someone who's been a bit of a petrol head, you start looking at something like the Teslas, and you think, wow, they're well appointed, a really good drive, and they bloody fang. So, it's that thing of the market has gone up there to meet the buyer, rather than people being, forced to, you'll take what you're given. So, yeah, that doesn't surprise me that he's changed with how the electric vehicle markets evolved.
In his specific case as well, he had the sort of the benefit really thrown into his face, because they did a solar upgrade at the end of last year, and so they purchased a new house. It had a solar system, but it was aging and it sort of needed a bit of a refresh. And he decided, all right, we've got the solar panels. They're not really doing what they need to do. So he talked to an electrician, like a solar company, who came out, did an assessment, and said, listen, for not a lot more money, because of the government subsidies at the time, we'll put a battery on. It'll power your house, all this sort of stuff. I've never seen anyone do a flip from this stuff is crap to holy moly, everyone should get one of these, because his power bill went into the negatives basically overnight. And now he's like, how else can I benefit from this? And naturally, the next step for him was, let's get an EV. So he'll end up with a diesel, his diesel ute, and his wife will have an EV, which they'll use sort of, around town and things like that. So, and I think that's a good mix. And we've spoken about this before, where I think that for a lot of Aussies, that's probably a reality for now. And I think what we'll see over the next few years is a transition from a diesel and an EV to maybe like a hybrid and an EV. And as battery tech continues to get better, because there is still that range anxiety, the charging infrastructure isn't there, and so on and so forth. And I think that's where government has a role to play, is that charging infrastructure. When we come to different people will believe different things politically in this space, but I believe that one of government's roles is to, as a regulatory body, is also to help roll out major infrastructure projects. If you can say, we're going to build a charging network, not just for consumers, but also for big truck fleets, because the amount of energy required to want to move one of these massive B-double trucks and these road trains and things like that is immense. And so you need massive charging networks. The amount of power that these facilities require is absolutely gargantuan from a consumer level. So because the scale is so big, that's where I think that the government really has a role to play to facilitate and I think either directly build some of this infrastructure or incentivize private companies to do that. And actually, I think there's an argument to be made that there could be a certain level of nationalization involved in this, because imagine if you've got a situation where basically, if we think back to the invention of the car, right? You would have to go to like a pharmacy or a proper chemist to make your fuel. Very inconvenient. So we came up with this idea of a fuel station. Here in Australia, we call them a petrol station or a servo. And so if we think about like the infrastructure that we've had to build to facilitate the normal day-to-day movement of vehicles that you probably don't even think about, right? Not from just building roads, but also the traffic infrastructure, the service stations, the mechanics, like the entire industry that is built around cars is kind of insane when you think about it. And so I think government needs to kind of, because it is such a big entity, is kind of put the hand on the market and tip the scales a little bit, whether that be by subsidizing EV vehicles, which they have been doing, or I think your money's probably better spent in building and upgrading infrastructure, which can then be reaped back to the taxpayer, at which point we can pay the taxpayer back and then sell it on to private business, hand over the reins and say, all right, you guys take over from now, which they've done with other infrastructure things like telecom back in the day. So I think there's an argument here where the government could get very, very involved, or they could kind of just put their finger on the scales and kind of go, we're going to keep an arm's length. So depending on what style of government you want, I think there's a role for them to play. Either way you want to, either side of the aisle you want to go. And I think that's going to be quite crucial to get this up off the ground. The company that, we've got some major trucking companies here in Australia, and I think what you'll see is probably some of the smaller ones, if they can be like incentivized, is the word I was going to say pushed, but that's probably not right. Incentivized to transition. And these trucks have a long life, but they're also maintenance heavy. The fuel costs are through the roof, right? Their ongoing running costs are absolutely massive. So if we can incentivize them to move away, if you basically walk into their office and say, listen, you're replacing, let's say, a truck every 2 years, right? Or doing a major overhaul on a truck every 2 years, to the point where you probably could look at or justify purchasing a new truck. If we can say to you, let's make that truck either a hybrid or an EV, and we will, either give you a tax break, or there's many ways to skin this cat.
Yep.
That's what I think will happen. But I think that's the smart way of doing this. But the key thing is the charging infrastructure needs to be there. It's a chicken and egg type situation. Until you have that charging infrastructure where they can see, okay, I'm not at a major disadvantage from going from A to B, from Sydney to Melbourne. I may need to include a stop along the way for charging or something like that. But if you can lay it out and say your business is not going to be majorly harmed by this transition, and actually it will be better off as a result of, then of course they're going to do it. Of course they are. But you need to show them, one, it's possible, and two, that there is a benefit for them. And I think there is a role for government to play in that space. And I think this is it's all very exciting. The low-hanging fruit is and I think that in my mind, the logical next step is that last mile, because those trucks aren't driving generally through the night. And I think a very smart way to start this is go to Woolies and Coles and possibly some of the other big retailers and say, maybe like Officeworks and things like that, and say, you guys have delivery fleets. You guys do deliver groceries and other goods around the country every single day. Let's electrify your entire fleets and we'll give you a tax break. and will incentivize you to put charges in and those sorts of things. Boom. Very low-hanging fruit. And before you know it, they'll go, we're making record profits now. Deliveries are cheaper. Everybody's happy. And once that snowball starts rolling, it's just going to gain more and more momentum. And I think that's probably the best place to start.
Yeah.
But, look, we've been right before. There you go, Albo. There's a free one for you. But look, many ways to skin this cat, as I've said, and it is a big subject. It's a huge thing. But at the end of the day, we're currently spending silly amounts of money to build, which isn't a bad thing. Like, I'm not against the federal budget this year having almost $12 billion as part of the National Fuel Security Plan. And if you are interested, again, those details are in the show notes. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I just think we need to probably start thinking a little bit smarter about the future of this, especially if we consider that the global situation around this, I feel, has changed. Iran is very aware that they can shut down the Strait of Hormuz very, very quickly. The US is struggling to reopen it, and so on and so forth. I think we've turned the page on this, and I think this might be the catalyst that, okay, now we genuinely need to start thinking about a transition away onto something else, and we can keep it homegrown. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean completely transitioning to a renewable type situation, but that is part of the mix, and we can build more solar. We can build out. Before we know it, we may have way more power than we need. It might be cheaper than we need. That's good for other infrastructure projects like data centers. It's good for other it's good for smelting. It's good for this, that, and the other thing. If you build it, they will come. So let's start building it. Come on.
Yep,
all right.
Agreed.
Let's move on. It's now time for our Two Ticks Town Talk.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert, fair man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've travelled, I've had my share.
All right, we head back to Pukatja in South Australia for part 2. So I'll leave a link in the show notes to part 1 if you haven't heard it yet. The stories are independent, so you can listen out of order. Bit of a recap on Pukatja. It was formerly known as Urna Bella, and it's an Aboriginal community in the eastern Musgrave Ranges of South Australia within the Ardeet, Pintinjara, Yakatjara lands, and it's one of the 6 main communities in the lands. So it was a pastoral lease before it became a Presbyterian mission station in 1937. So the colonisation effectively began with the collection of dingo scalps by doggers, and that was basically shooting the dingoes to protect sheep flocks. So the local Aboriginal people, they used their hunting skill to collect the scalps, and they received payment in rations and clothing and other goods. And unsurprisingly, relationships formed between the doggers and the local people. There was cohabitation. And groups of Alangu sometimes travelled with the doggers, or even established themselves like their own businesses. Doggers in their own right. So there's a few pastoral leases around there on the edge of the Western Desert, but the development in Musgrave Ranges was marginal. But because of the labour-intensive nature of that arid land farming, there was a good interdependence developed between the pastoralists and Aboriginal people. So the Pintinjara and Yakatjara people, who call themselves Arangu, they're part of the Western Desert cultural block, and they've lived there for thousands of years. But unlike some of the ones that we've had before, they were basically largely undisturbed by European settlement until the early 20th century. They had occasional contact with explorers, crazy guys running across the desert. But their remoteness in some ways created a different relationship when there was the inevitable European meeting. The mission that's there, that was established by a Scottish medical doctor and Aboriginal rights campaigner, Charles Duguid. He'd seen discrimination and labour abuse and sexual abuse during a visit, and he said, look, let's get a mission happening here as a buffer against the encroaching settlers. So the Presbyterian Church purchased the Ernabella lease in 1936, and I went into a few more details about this last one, but basically the mission respected Anangu culture and tradition, offered medical help, it was all voluntary, education without conditions. They taught initially in Pitjantjatjara, didn't separate the kids, and people just moved there of their own accord. And in the end, they ended up formally handing over the community to the Community Council on 1st of January 1974. So, more details on that in the first story, but that's a little bit of background on Pukatja. A very positive one there. But meanwhile, over in Munich, West Germany, in 1950, a bloke called Johann Friedrich Hohenberger was born. So in the early 1970s, Hohenberger worked as an independent contractor for a road construction and maintenance company in Munich. Around July in 1974, he forged road building orders, ordered work that was never performed, and embezzled approximately 300,000 Deutschmarks. Unsurprisingly, they issued a warrant for his arrest, but then while he was on a skiing holiday in Italy, he didn't return. His bags were later found, and police initially considered the possibility of accident or suicide. They were a bit sus that he'd been potentially tipped off. So, yes.
Very possibly.
So Hohenberger, who miraculously wasn't dead, arrived in Melbourne in January 1975 on a flight from Auckland, New Zealand. The immigration records said he travelled onwards, but he ended up remaining in Australia. So using the name that we are more familiar with, of John Friedrich, and false qualifications, he obtained work. In March 1975, he took a position as community officer or community advisor up at Pukatja with the Board of Ecumenical Missions and Relations, BOMAR. That's a uniting church organisation that helped with managing Aboriginal missions. So while he was there in Pukatja, he was involved in assisting community development and supervising civil works, sort of a little bit of his root of his training. He did become really crook, seriously ill with an infection up there, and was treated by a nurse, Shirley K. Manning. They became engaged in October 75 and then married in February 76 at St. David's Presbyterian Church in West Strathfield in Sydney. After that, they moved on from Pukatja to a BOMAR mission in Mornington Island, where he did manager and multiple additional roles, including coastal watcher, fisheries officer, and other government positions. So they put in their resignation from there in late 1976 after overseeing recovery from Cyclone Ted. In late 1976, Friedrich had applied for a safety engineer position with the National Safety Council of Australia, the Victorian division. So he started there beginning of 77 and just rose rapidly, becoming an executive director in 1982. So that's 5 years from going the safety engineer position to, now I'm an ED. Yeah,
so a very quick transition, isn't it?
Yeah, he had the gift. So he got up there at the head of this, and he transformed this organisation from a relatively obscure body that they just focused on road and industrial safety. Turned into this large paramilitary-style national search and rescue operation. He got in assets like helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, a 42-metre vessel, a midget submarine, boats, vehicles, decompression chambers, an infrared scanner, other equipment. Staff numbers grew from 100 in 1984 to about 450 people by 1989. And that's, came from 104.50 in that amount of time is also no mean feat. The organisation trained for specialised operations, including the use of pigeons and parachuting dogs with handlers, and they also maintained an elite pararescue group. They secured contracts, including with the Defence Department, and they operated from a base in the Latrobe Valley in the Gippsland area of Victoria. Friedrich himself got the Medal of the Order of Australia in 1988 for service to the community in industrial safety and search and rescue. And they just lived modestly on property at Seaton near West Stale. Unfortunately, the expansion was financed by unsecured or poorly secured loans from numerous banks. They reckon about 27 banks and nearly 50 financiers, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. There was in 18... yeah. Yeah, I was pretty right. The chairman in 1989 said, look, I'd like to have a bit of a look at what seemed to be a couple of financial anomalies and
a couple of discrepancies.
Yeah, and the whole financial situation got revealed, and in fact that started the collapse of the National Safety Council of Australia. So banks and other institutions let large sums of money, just largely on the basis of Friedrich's word and the organisation's reputation. That's a phenomenon they call the halo effect, where you have a cognitive bias where your overall positive impression, or negative, but in this case positive impression of a person or brand or product strongly influences how you judge their specific traits. And there was also inadequate regulatory oversight of non-profit entities and limited scrutiny of its finances and government. After it was collapsed and they looked into it, the investigation revealed that Friedrich wasn't an Australian citizen, that he possessed no valid birth certificate matching his claimed identity, did not appear on any electoral rolls. And despite this, he'd received a security clearance from the Department of Defence and also access to Royal Australian Air Force bases.
How? I don't understand, because the security clearance process, sorry to cut in. Tell me. It's pretty thorough. Well, maybe it wasn't back then, and maybe that's why it is.
I think that's today. A fair comment.
Yeah, because I don't understand. Even without a birth certificate, I don't think you could get a security clearance without a birth certificate or anything like that. So that's pretty shocking to me. But anyway, I'll let you continue.
But look, he had the gift. You know, he had that thing that he was likable. He was really driven and hardworking. And I can imagine when you've got someone like his mind, who's such basically a con man. You can just have someone say, "Oh yeah, I'll get the birth certificate to you," or I've sent that to someone else, and I'll think, "Oh, John's so nice. He must have that sorted. Look, I'll stamp his thing to say we've got that. I'll get that from him later, and then that goes on to the next one. It's all, oh yeah, well I've already got that." So he was obviously able to talk his way there, because I mean it was back then, 1989. It's not as if the Defence Department was run by people who didn't know what was going on. Yeah, there's a lot of cluey people and bureaucracies there. So he he obviously had that gift. So at that time, the estimates of collapse at the National Safety Council of Australia and Friedrich's empire, they ranged from about 250 million to 297 million, say about 300 million bucks. The State Bank of Victoria was among the largest creditors at over 100 million. The State Bank of Victoria didn't go particularly, well, in fact, they went belly up. I don't know if it was a result of this, but it was a result of them doing a lot of mistakes like this. But yeah, 100 million is a lot to be on the hook for.
That's not a rounding error, let's put it that way.
No, it's not. And the security he provided often consisted of claimed containerized safety equipment that in many cases it didn't even exist, or it was just containers of empty or inferior containers. He also used fictitious debtor accounts. But the thing that was a bit weird about this is he didn't appear to enrich himself personally. The funds were channeled into the organisation's operation and equipment. He literally lived a modest lifestyle with his family on a property near Sale. There was no record of luxury spending or expensive cars or, designer goods or lavish holidays or any other personal extravagance funded by the diverted money. And the later assessments state the funds obtained through the unsecured loans were channelled into building up the National Safety Council of Australia, all the aircraft and vessels, everything, rather than into his private accounts. Still didn't make it right, obviously, but it was just one of those interesting things that, he wasn't sort of living high on the hog as this was happening. He was just driven to build up this organisation and the prestige that went along with him. So, I suppose it's not always money. After the chairman had queried financial anomalies, Friedrich disappeared and prompted a nationwide police manhunt, which also attracted extensive media coverage. He was eventually arrested near Perth in April '89 and then 16 days later extradited to Victoria. He was initially charged with one count of obtaining financial advantage by deception and then later with a further 91 counts. So he did spend some time in custody before being released on bail. Appeared in court in July 1991 in connection with the fraud, and then 3 days later he was found dead from a single gunshot wound to the head in a field on his farm near Sale. So death was ruled suicide, and he was 40 years old and then cremated. So he was survived by his wife Shirley, a daughter and two sons, and there's not really any publicly available info on there to say what they've gone on to or what the story is with them. Possibly not really wanting much attention, I would guess. The Victorian division of the National Safety Council itself just collapsed once the scale of it became clear. They appointed a liquidator. Supreme Court ordered it to shut down. Assets were sold off. Creditors basically only got a fraction of what they had lent. Hundreds of staff lost their jobs as the operation was dismantled. So the activities ceased. So the broader National Safety Council of Australia, which has existed since 1927 as a not-for-profit safety awareness body, underwent restructuring, and it's still going, but it's returned to a much smaller scale and focused just on occupational health and safety training, consulting and auditing. So its collapse also contributed to a broader regulatory changes in the Australian corporate law. So it tightened up reporting and oversight requirements for non-profit companies, probably unsurprisingly. And this is one of the reasons I enjoy our Two Ticks Town Talk segment. I'm looking up the details of Frederick led me to his time in Pukatja, which then gave us the mostly positive story on the town we heard 2 weeks ago. Yet we also find it was a stepping stone in the journey of one of Australia's greatest fraudsters. So it just goes to show what stories are waiting to be told about places like this week's Two Ticks Town Talk town of Pukatja in South Australia.
Oh, how interesting. I know you've been itching to of tell this story because it's this incredible story. I jumped on their website to see if they sort of make mention of
Who's this, the National Safety Council or Pukatja?
Yeah, the National Safety Council. And they do have, on their About page, they have a section under history. And if you go to that, it says they sort of break it down into 1927 to 1946 and then 1950s to 2013. And they just say in the early 90s, the organization embarked on a period of renewal, strengthening its role as a not-for-profit provider for workplace health and safety services. So they basically don't mention it at all. Which I can understand. I can understand that.
You can sort of say, how would it help in some ways? But,
Yeah, but I think what's sort of upsetting about this to a point is, like you said, he didn't use this opportunity to enrich himself. He just used his position technically to defraud a bunch of banks by purchasing life-saving equipment for a non-profit organization. It's not a government body, but I think a lot of people kind of saw it in that sort of way. And I think that's possibly why he was able to get away with as much as he did. And they purchased facilities and equipment to do the job that they were going to do. So, oftentimes with stories like this, with major fraud and things like that, it basically it ends with the guy, unfortunately, taking his own life, like in this situation, or he retired to his Cayman Islands resort or something like that. They got away with it and they enriched themselves. But obviously there was opportunities for him to do that, and he didn't do that, which is kind of surprising, quite frankly. Out of these stories, it often doesn't end in that way. Yeah. And I genuinely think that Australia should have an organization. It probably should be a government organization that he kind of had begun to establish this sort of, and we've sort of talked about this before, where it's like we almost need, and maybe it could be under like a new branch of the military, a bit like how the Americans have like a Coast Guard and stuff like that. I feel like Australia needs almost like a unified emergency services, like paramilitary organization, similar to like the SES in various states, but on a national level with some serious equipment that they can use to, bushfire relief or other national disasters like cyclones and things like that. And I know we use the Defence Force in that capability, but that's kind of like because we don't have a better alternative. That's really not what the Defence Force actually is supposed to be doing.
Well, it's part of the reason he got some of the contracts with it, because it's not a role that they do to that detailed level.
Exactly. So in a way, I'm a little bit frustrated with how this all worked out, because I think there could have been a huge benefit to Australia today if what he tried to build this into fraudulently, we could have benefited massily from it had it not been a fraudulent situation. Right? If he had not done it fraudulently, things might be better. But the reality is, if it hadn't been fraudulent, it probably never would have existed, and so on and so forth. So,
maybe.
But yeah, look, I mean, he had a vision. You can't say that he didn't, and he went after it. It's so interesting. We when we start, like you said, when we look at these histories of these places, and we find out these stories that are just some people just live the most incredible lives, for better or for worse, you know. But man, there are some interesting people out there.
Yeah, like you can imagine, you're up there in Pukatja, and you know this bloke sort of come in. It sound like he was, you know, pretty dedicated to getting, you know, civic things happening, and you'd know him, you'd have that relationship with him. It sounded like he was very personable. And then he sort of moves on. You think, oh, yeah, wish you best of luck. And then you think, oh, he's got the job. Oh, wow, he's doing well. He's really building up. And then finding out he's done what? I mean, you think, God, it was only sort of a, you know, whatever that was, 10, 15, 20 years ago, he was working on the mission, and now he's become like a national fugitive, and we're talking Australia's biggest fraud. It would I don't know, do your head in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I've just looked up one of the ships that they had, which was called MV Blue Nibbler, was ended up being renamed. It was the previously named HMAS Protector, and it became renamed Seahorse Horizon. And while it briefly was a part of the National Safety Council of Australia, it previously was owned and run by the Royal Australian Navy. And once all of this went down, it was basically purchased back by the Navy and then eventually sort of sold on into, it's still government owned, still Commonwealth owned, as part of the Defence Maritime Services, which is sort of like an auxiliary fleet that the Commonwealth has. And this ship, I have seen many times floating around Sydney and elsewhere as a. Oh, do you know what? You may have even seen it yourself at some points. It's a pretty unique looking ship, but I had no idea that this particular ship was tangled all up in this. It's the only ship that they operated, and there you go. It's funny how history just has a way of intertwining a bunch of things that you know, crazy.
Yeah,
all right,
it is.
What a crazy story. All right, let's move on. Speaking of ships, Chinese research vessel sparks alarm in Palau after repeated incursions. And what does this mean for Australia? In the final days of May 2026, a Chinese research vessel ventured 74 kilometers into Palau's waters and reportedly spent 14 hours moving slowly through the island nation's maritime zone. The offending ship is the 89-meter icebreaker GD, which feels weird because there's not a lot of ice in the tropical waters around the island nation of Palau. Exactly what it was doing actually remains unclear to Palau's president, Serangal Whips Jr. He said, quote, "Their research vessel came into our exclusive economic zone uninvited and do whatever they want. What are they looking for, and what is their ultimate intention?" End quote. We don't know. Launched in 2024, the GD was designed for environmental monitoring and surveying to respond to climate change, according to the Chinese state media. Its fleet of unmanned drones and underwater vehicles can map the sea floor and collect data on everything from undersea minerals, ocean currents, and marine ecosystems. But security experts fear that the vessel and dozens of others just like it may be gathering intelligence for military purposes. One that could aid Beijing in the event of a future conflict over Taiwan. And the GD's incursion was not an isolated incident for Palau. Similar incidents were reported in 2018, 2024, and 2025, while in 2023, a Chinese vessel allegedly operated near Palau's fiber optic cables. The most recent incursion, according to Mr. Whips, came in July, shortly after China launched a ballistic missile from a submarine that flew over multiple Pacific islands. President Whips explained their fears. He says, quote, They're surveying over the top of our fiber optic cable, and they have gear in the water. So for us, it is a security concern, end quote. 16 Chinese research vessels have been deployed in the North Pacific this year, according to the Pacific Center of Island Security, a think tank that tracks vessels and geopolitical activity in the region. Jennifer Parker, an adjunct professor of defense and security at the University of Western Australia, said that some of the vessels could be used for pure science. The scale and location of China's activities also suggest that they could be gathering intelligence to conduct submarine and anti-submarine warfare against the United States and its allies, including Australia. In 2024, an investigation by the Center for Strategic and International Studies into 64 Chinese research vessels found that 80% demonstrated suspicious behavior and had organizational links suggesting involvement in advancing Beijing's geopolitical agenda. And this is part of the problem we have, and we've repeated this multiple times, about Beijing's sort of intertwining of government and civilian organizations to kind of push. It's very difficult to go, well, this clearly isn't a military vessel. It's a research vessel. It might be even owned by a university or something like that. But once you start to pull this ball of strings, they all kind of go back to the CCP. The study did say that China has developed the largest fleet of civilian research vessels in the world, heavily concentrating its surveys in the South China Sea and the Western Pacific. I'm sure that's not a coincidence. This included a story that we covered back in June about a whale graveyard off the coast of Western Australia. And the dual-use nature of research vessels can make their true purpose difficult to discern because mapping the seafloor can serve both scientific and military objectives, which, I mean, when we talked in June about the whale graveyard off Western Australia, that was something I very much highlighted at the time, was my concern that this was, whilst being scientifically beneficial to learn of these things, their primary purpose probably wasn't to discover this, and it was mapping the ocean floor for submarine warfare or possibly planting acoustic listening devices or so on and so forth. We just don't know. And we know that the Chinese are possibly doing this because our friends, the Americans, have done the same in the past.
Yeah.
A 2025 study published in the journal Frontiers in Political Science noted that unlike other countries, China doesn't distinguish between ships operating for naval survey, scientific research, or commercial purposes. But the director of the Pacific Center for Island Security, Leland Bettis, said there were clues in the vessel's patterns. Mr. Bettis said that the GD was tracked in May following a pattern suggesting it was mapping the ocean floor near Guam along a corridor likely used by U.S. submarines. A recent Lowly Institute report into China's military said that two of the main priorities of the People's Liberation Army were developing the forces needed to invade Taiwan and deterring or defeating a U.S. intervention. As a hub for military operations in the Pacific, Guam is home to multiple U.S. nuclear submarines likely to be used as a staging area. And it is likely to be used as a staging area if the U.S. intervened in a Taiwan conflict, as well as Western Australia. Shocker. Mr. Bettis said that Chinese research vessels could be trying to track the signatures of U.S. submarines or even planting listening devices, and detailed mapping helped submarines navigate terrain like underwater mountains and trenches. The shape and depth of the seabed, along with the ocean temperature, also affects how sound travels through the water column. But ultimately, all of this needs to be put into context, that marine scientific research in another country's EEZ without permission is a breach of international law. But Palau's options to stop China entering its territorial waters are severely limited. In a diplomatic complaint to China, Palau said that the incursion showed a disregard for its sovereignty and that the rules-based order nations were supposed to follow. As we've seen time and time again, China doesn't care. They've been operating under their own rules in its efforts to map the vast expanses of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Meanwhile, China has defended the activities of its vessels in the Pacific, saying in July that an alleged incursion near the Japanese island of Okinawa was legitimate, lawful, and beyond reproach. So it's more of the same crap that we're seeing it time and time again. Ardeet, what do you think about this? Is this just being China being a bully, or is there something else going on? Or maybe we should give them the benefit of the doubt. What do you reckon?
Look, I think more than one thing can be true. Can be research related and can be defence related. Basically zero level of trust though in what's being said or what's being justified. Yeah, I can buy that they might be there tracking, doing genuine scientific research. I find a little bit. Environmental monitoring, I don't know that I would necessarily put the CCP up there as staunch saviours of the environment. I don't think that's the greatest quality. And look, sea floors are terrain also. So if you're planning, if you're doing any sort of military planning, it's even I, with my sort of limited knowledge, know you have to understand the terrain. You have to sort of be able to look and anticipate where your enemy may be coming from and where they may be going. And I mean, I didn't even think about it until you said it. How sound is bouncing across there. So even if it's pure research, it's still valuable military information. So that's why I say it can be more than one thing. I tend to think, given that sort of almost I don't know, I suppose you'd call it a belligerent approach of not respecting the zone of Palau and just basically, well, what are you going to do about it? Tends to indicate it tends to show it as a show of force. It is a bit of a flex. It's like, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to feed you the message that it's just for research. So, if you accuse us, we can just sort of throw up our hands and say, you're overreacting. All we're doing is researching, and then you can hand wave off some of the diplomacy of, maybe we shouldn't have gone in there uninvited, but let's not sort of get too concerned about it. You can sort of imagine how that might go diplomatically. There's also the thing, well, what is Palau going to do about it? And then by extension, what's the Pacific Islands themselves going to do about it, and how much do you end up wanting to do about it? And China does understand this, and quite understandably, doesn't mean I agree with it, but quite understandably, they're sitting there thinking, well, we can get away with it. We can do it. Nobody's going to stop us. And each time they're doing it, they're getting more and more information. They're getting more and more advantages, and it's information that can't be taken away. You can't just turn around and say, oh, okay, well, hand over all your researchers as punishment for doing the wrong thing. They got it. It's in there. It's in the databases. Again, it doesn't take a hell of a lot of imagination to understand that if you do have this this mapping of the terrain, you feed it into supercomputers and AI, and you would find some very interesting things about a territory that is essentially very unexplored by humanity. So it's an advantage that you can see China's going to get. And as you said themselves, US does the same thing, because why wouldn't you? It's a basic requirement for your military planning, particularly given, as we've discussed many times on the podcast, the power and the advantages of submarines. This is it's another field of war. It's another environment for war. So it would be silly not to prepare for it. So I don't believe the spin that's going on there. In terms of what can be done about it? Well, at this stage, probably not a hell of a lot. Yeah, you can do some sort of diplomatic pushing back, but it's also smart because it's not so much that you can start to do anything threatening with, and also too, as we've seen here, China has the CCP, and it's worth stating again, when we're talking China, we're talking, in this case, we're talking that the CCP and that apparatus and that bureaucracy and that authoritarian power, Chinese people, even though CCP is made up of Chinese people, it's not a disparaging comment against it's Chinese people. Know and love a lot of them, but the CCP people probably picked up DK and I not exactly the biggest fans of. But they've shown their long-term thinking, and part of their long-term thinking is been the securing of the markets for the rare earths, the minerals, the processing. And this is why I also made that little jab about the environmental thing, because there's a lot of horrible environmental consequences of much of this processing. But they've got it. So now and we've seen China do this before. If people do push back about it, they'll say, well, okay, we hear what you're saying. I'm sorry that your magnets are now going to be delayed. I'm sorry that the precious metals that the industrial metals you need to keep your economy going, well, we can't really help you with that anymore. And people, they know they've got much of the West and other areas over a barrel. So that's why it might sound a bit defeatist, but that's why I sort of say there's not really a hell of a lot that can be done about it at the moment, particularly as we're not in a position to do anything about it. Yeah. What do you think about? I'm probably not going to be surprised what you think about. Do you buy the research side? And can you just give a little bit? You did talk about maybe dropping sonic things, but can you just give a little bit of opinion on the sea floor as a military terrain too, if you don't mind?
All right, let's start there, because my knowledge of the space is quite limited. I wasn't a submariner. I like the sun too much. So, yeah. Look, if you don't mind confined spaces, don't like going outside, I would urge you to join the submarine fleet. It is notoriously understaffed and very well paid. So, if you're basically a vampire, get out there and join the submarine fleet. But my understanding is this: obviously, submarines are stealthy to a point, and the whole idea of the silent service, as they call it, is to try and be invisible. And there are a number of ways that you can do this. But obviously, it's a very large, most of them are very large vessels that are moving through the water column. And the water column is built up of several different layers. There are temperature layers, there are salinity layers and stuff like that. So I think a lot of people think of the ocean as kind of like this big homogeneous bucket of water, because that's kind of how we interact with water on a daily basis in our normal lives. You fill your bath up with water, or you see a bucket of water or something like that, maybe a swimming pool, and there's not really much to it. It's just a volume of water. But the ocean doesn't really act like that. It divides itself up into specific layers. And if you know where these layers are, they're pretty consistent in certain areas of the sea. And if you know where they are, you can use that to your advantage, moving through it in a submarine. And so the knowledge of that is incredibly valuable, because if you do know that, then you know that submarines may be at a certain depth. They may be sitting between two different, maybe a temperature layer and a salinity layer, so that they are protected against sonar and things like that, because the sonar can bounce off those layers and other things, or create distortions and so on and so forth. Right. So there is a lot to that, and I'm not super knowledgeable in that space, but I do understand the fact that that exists, as well as obviously the terrain.
As a very sort of, this is probably an exaggerated thing, but if you had a layer of oil on water, you could imagine sound or light being different as it goes between those two layers.
Exactly. And the knowledge of where those exist and how they interact with each other is invaluable to basically the submarine fleets of the world. And obviously, as a natural thing, they do change. I'm sure they change more in some areas than others, and so on and so forth. Another thing is you can drop essentially like listening devices that run for a certain amount of time. They're only listening for certain acoustic signatures, or maybe they're looking for magnetic anomalies and things like that. Submarines generally are coated with like a rubber lining. Exactly the composition of that, of course, is classified. But at the end of the day, they are large metallic objects, and that's one of the easiest ways to find a submarine is looking for its magnetic signature. And so I'd imagine, I don't know this for a fact because all of this stuff is super classified, but I would imagine there are devices that they can put onto the seafloor, even if they're not that small, even if they're sort of the size of a car or something like that. In the scope of the ocean, that's basically tiny, right? It's like a grain. It's like a grain of sand,
right? So
there's a lot of room to hide stuff like that, and by the time you probably could find it in a submarine, if you're even able to detect it, it may be too late. It may have already seen you, and now your submarine's position is compromised. That may not mean you're going to be immediately destroyed, but it may mean that they now know your submarine is here, which means it can't be somewhere else. And so, and that's kind of part of the thing with submarine warfare is you don't know, well, ideally, you don't know where they are, and therefore they could be anywhere. And so countries like the US spend a lot of time and effort making sure their submarines' whereabouts are unknown, because it is also part of their nuclear triad. The submarine fleet, or in Britain's case, it is their entire nuclear deterrent. They don't have a nuclear capability today, as far as I'm aware. I know they previously had nuclear bombs that could be carried by planes, and I know they were acquiring that capability again, but the stuff is very expensive and it takes time. I'm not sure if the British have actually done that yet, but in their case, their submarine fleet is their nuclear deterrent. Once those submarines set sail and they disappear, they go out onto patrol, they continuously move through the ocean, specifically so that this submarine may have, 20, 30 warheads on it, and each one of those intercontinental ballistic missiles may have 10 or 20 warheads on it. So a single missile could destroy, the entire coast of Australia, basically. That's a deterrent that gives you a lot of international power, right? It's a very big stick. It's the biggest stick we have. So as you can understand, it's very, very important. And of course, the other side of this is that the Chinese want to know all of this information. And the more they can gather, the better position they're in to counter it. So it may not be that they're dropping listening devices or magnetic devices. They may not even be doing that. They may literally just be looking for those layer differences and literally just mapping the seafloor. Because of course, and this has happened before, submarines do have a pretty tough time navigating underwater, especially when they're trying to be silent. You can't just look out the window, turn the flashlight on and see what's ahead of you. So mapping the seafloor is a huge, huge task to give you better information, knowing where the mountains are, where the dips and valleys are, which means, again, you can hide and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of valuable information there. The big one for me, and part of the reason why I think the Chinese are really focusing on certain areas as well, is there's a network of cables across the world. And I think we all know this, but
yeah, right.
Once you start thinking about it a little bit as well, there's basically a web of quite large undersea cables that connect the entire world together via the internet. And yes, there are redundancies, but a lot of these cables run reasonably close to each other, depending on where they're going, because of course it's the straightest line and so on and so forth. So in an international conflict type situation, one of the first things you would want to do is blind your enemy. And one of the best ways to do that is to cut those cables and destroy their ability to, they're fiber optic cables. If you cut them, it's very expensive to replace them. It's not impossible to repair them, but it's very, very difficult. So that would be one of the first things you would do. It's like blowing up an airfield. Cut the cable if you can, and blind the enemy. In
fact, you could even drop devices down there that basically straddle the cable that have got clippers on it that are just awaiting a signal.
Exactly. And it wouldn't surprise me if they had done something like that. The US had done that in the past with, I don't know if they were fiber optic cables or if they were sort of like telegraph lines, planting listening devices with using submarines during the Cold War and stuff like that. So we know that is definitely a capability that countries have had for quite a long time. So there's a lot of suspicion around this, but we're the quote unquote good guys have been doing this for a long time as well. So it's just, I think, probably not quite as blatant as this. I think the difference is what we see is China doesn't seem to have an interest in playing by the rules-based global order. They just are going, you guys do it, we're going to do it, and we're just going to do it out in the open. And we've got plausible deniability of, that's a research vessel, we don't know what they're doing or whatever. But let's be honest, everybody knows what they're doing. So, and I think that's what's it does kind of frustrate everybody because it's so overt, and it's just like, come on, man, And a country like Palau, they don't have the strength to push back. There's basically nothing that they can do to stop this from happening in their backyard, period, without complaining to other bigger countries that may step in. But like you said, China has a lot of economic pull. It has a lot of military might now. So we've seen this with other countries like in the Philippines and things. It's very, very difficult to get China to pull their heads in because they just go, we don't need to anymore. We're big and strong and you're not. So and that rubs people the wrong way. If Xi Jinping is listening to this, I would urge him maybe reconsider at how having friends is a good thing. This is not how you make friends and influence people. So maybe it's worth reconsidering. So
let's hope so.
Look, what concerns me as well around this is that we know they've been doing this sort of stuff off the Western Australia. What does that mean for our submarine and naval surface fleet units in the future? We don't know. I'm sure the powers that be are all over this sort of stuff, but at the end of the day, does this give the Chinese military an advantage in a war that may be coming? Possibly not. We won't know until something happens. But look, I'm glad they found the whale graveyard though, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, silver lining.
Silver lining. All right. Speaking of silver linings, let's move on. It's time for This Week in Australian History.
Well, this week in Australian history, we're covering 14th to 20th of August. August 14th, 1963, the Yolngu people petitioned the Australian House of Representatives with a bark petition after the government sold part of the Arnhem Land Reserve to a bauxite mining company. The bark petitions protested the excision of land from the Arnhem Land Aboriginal Reserve for bauxite mining without consultation, and they're regarded as a foundational document in the modern land rights movement and are on display in Parliament House.
Oh, that's cool. I think the song From Little Things, Big Things Grow is about this, yeah.
Oh, no, hang on.
Or is that a different?
No, I think that, I think that might have been, what was that thing that we saw recently? There was some of the anniversary of the of Whitlam pouring the sand into, why don't I remember his...
Yep. That was Indigenous stockman Vincent Lingari.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a different mob, but similar time period, similar strike and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. 1984, the racehorse Fine Cotton is the centre of a substitution scam at Eagle Farm Racecourse. Basically, they swapped it over trying to get. It wasn't fine cotton. It was a ring-in. So, yeah, that all sort of fell apart and became a notorious racing scandal. August 15th, 1914, the first Australian Imperial Force was formed following Britain's declaration of war on Germany. 1945, victory in the Pacific Day marked the effective end of the Second World War following Japan's surrender, and celebrations occurred across Australia as the nation marked the conclusion of more than 5 years of conflict. August 16th, 1998, two Victorian police officers, Gary Silk and Rodney Miller, are murdered in Moorabbin, Victoria, shot while conducting surveillance. 1999, the Balti Bridge over the Yarra River is open in Melbourne, Victoria. August 17 in 1895, the Albert Railway Bridge opens in Brisbane, and that was provided an important rail crossing of the Brisbane River and supported the expansion of Queensland's rail network in the late 19th century.
It's a pity we haven't built any more trains since.
Yeah, well,
it certainly feels
like
that way.
Yeah, snap. 1980, two-month-old Azaria Chamberlain disappears at Uluru, and her mother claimed a dingo took the infant. I think it's been proven that it has. It was a very controversial case, with later the Chamberlains being, their claim was vindicated after a lot of... God, in fact, you'll hear over the next few months in This Week in Australian History little snippets and that come through of it. 1991, Wade Frankham commits the Strathfield massacre in Sydney, where he shot 7 people and then took his own life. So, 7 people to be sympathy for and 1 not. August 18th, 1904, George Reid becomes the 4th Prime Minister of Australia. He was the leader of the Free Trade Party and formed government in 1904. I've got to say, I wouldn't have guessed him being the 4th Prime Minister of Australia, so close to the 1901 Federation. But...
Yeah.
That's, that 3 years have...
3 years. Well, we have these trends where we just go, next, not next.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's been happening since Federation.
Yeah, the more that changes, the more that stays the same.
Yep, exactly. 1966, the Battle of Long Tan was a decisive Australian victory in the Vietnam War. 1986, Janine Haynes becomes the leader of the Australian Democrats and Australia's first female party leader of a party representing the Australian Parliament. 1989, a national pilot strike begins, and they had to end up using Defence Force planes for some domestic flights. August 19th, 1907, the rabbit-proof fence is completed, and it was a complete success. Can stop the rabbits. That was after years of
Emperor Nazi Goring stopped the rabbits, didn't he?
Oh, what? Oh,
that was a Telstra ad from back in the day. Anyway, if you want to know what that terrible joke was, I will put it in the show notes. And if you do remember what that joke was, you're a bloody legend.
In fact, I was having a chat with an old bloke at the coffee shop today. He stopped to say, stopped as he was going to the Louis to say, "Oh, I like your hat." I said, "It's a Cooper and that." And he said, "Oh, you know where it they got they started?" He said, "I was over in WA." I said, "Oh, where they put the rabbit-proof fence up," which he had a laugh at that. And then I was able to tell him about I can't remember the town it was down in Geelong way, that's where all the rabbits, genetic traits of all the rabbits in Australia have come from the couple of dozen that they brought in to be hunted down there. So, yeah, it was a bit of trading of factlets. 1961, Four Corners TV current affairs program is first screened. Then August 20th, 1857, the Dunbar is wrecked at the entrance to Sydney Harbour, killing 121 passengers. 1860, Burke and Wills expedition sets off from Royal Park, Melbourne, at about 4 p.m, watched by around 15,000 spectators, which was a big crowd. 1908, the United States Great White Fleet arrives in Sydney, demonstrating their naval power and strengthening ties, to demonstrate the strengthening of ties between Australia and the US. 2003, politicians Pauline Hanson and David Ettridge are sentenced to 3 years in prison after being found guilty of electoral fraud in Queensland, but the charges are later overturned. And finally, August 2008, University of New South Wales records an unprecedented Eureka Prizes haul, where the researchers took home a record 6 Australian Museum Eureka Prizes, which basically considered the Oscars of Australian science. So that's the highest tally by any institution in the awards history. So it spanned leadership in quantum computing, renewable energy, solar research, wetlands, river science, and public understanding of science. And I'm guessing there were 1 or 2 beakers full of home brew raised in the labs that night.
I reckon that there was. All right, that sound means it is time for our 4X bottle top question. And as I said at the start, this is all about the ocean, specifically Australia's waters. Now, I hope you've brushed up on your on your ocean trivia. First question. Western Australia's Shark Bay, which we've covered a few times now on the Two Ticks Town Talks, that in Shark Bay there is living rock fossils. Some of these are the oldest signs of life on Earth. They are called stromatolites. How old do they think they are?
Oh, God, I should be able to remember this because you've taken us to Shark Bay a couple of times and you did do one specifically on this that specifically mentioned these stromatolites. Now
To be fair though, that was a couple of years ago now. So
wow, a couple of years. So just to clarify, it's how old are they, or they're still living, and how long have they been living for? Is it the former or the latter?
That's a really good question that I don't know the answer to. We know they've been living there for this amount of time. Let's just go with that.
So that's what you're asking. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So it's right. Oh. Because it was a really surprisingly long time. What are we? I'm going to say, I'm going to wildly guess,
all right,
120,000 years.
Okay, so I did actually find the answer to both questions while you were talking. So I'm going to say the answer to both of those questions, one is less than that, one is greater than that. So I'll give you another shot.
Oh, okay. Okay, so how long? Well, I reckon the one that's less, because Otherwise, they'd have some record for some bizarre long life. I reckon that it's reasonable that, I don't know, they might be. I would say that they possibly live for 80 years but have been there for 200,000.
Okay, so
Not even close, am I?
No, I'm gonna blow
I can hear
you
the pause.
So, the living stromatolites in Halem Pool in Western Australia, in Shark Bay, they grow very, very slowly, less than a millimetre per year. And individual large column, they sort of make these like large columns structures. They sort of look like bad corals. It's kind of the, like, you know, an ottoman you might have in your lounge room. They kind of look like that, sort of squashed. And they a bit mushroomy shaped because they grow up to the surface, but they don't really like, you know, popping their heads out too much. So then they they sort of grow out. Individual large column structures that are still alive have been dated between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. That are still alive. But I feel like this is a little bit misleading because they're a bit like a tree where it's kind of only like, or coral where it's sort of that only the sort of the edge of it is alive and the rest, like the inside bit's kind of like the previous skeleton, if that makes sense. But these colonial cyanobacteria that make these stromatolites, they first appeared 3.5 billion years ago.
Oh, so I was close.
You were close. You were close.
God, 3.5 billion, bloody hell.
Yeah, they do suspect that they are very possibly one of the oldest forms of any life on Earth, which is pretty incredible. And it's incredible they still exist. They are not completely unique to Shark Bay. There are other pockets of them around the world. But of course, they are protected in Shark Bay because I do believe it's one of the best preserved and one of the largest on Earth. So it's pretty cool. Pretty boring to look at, but very cool nonetheless. All right, question 2. What percentage of sea life found in the cool waters of the Great Southern Reef in the southern waters of Australia lives nowhere else in the world? So basically, what percentage of life found on what we call the Great Southern Reef is unique to Australia as far as we know? And I'll qualify this because you may not know what the Great Southern Reef is. Basically, from Brisbane to Kalbarri in WA, which is a hell of a long way, but these are the cooler waters. There are a network of reefs the whole way around, including down in Victoria, your neck of the woods, and across all of those reefs, we call that the Great Southern Reef.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it doesn't get as much publicity as its big Great Barrier Reef cousin. But what's incredible is the percentage of sea life found there that is unique and found nowhere else.
What is the percentage? The percentage of sea life that is unique. You said unique out of all the known sea life in the world.
Yes, because, let's be honest, I'm sure there's stuff we don't know of elsewhere, but from what we can understand, our knowledge today it's unique to this area.
That's a lot. That's a big area, but unique. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm just trying to think, just visualizing where we are on the map. So latitudinally, we're going to share it with a few things. And so we're not going so Australia only. I'm going to, and I reckon this is a big number, but I'm going to say somewhere between 8 to 12%. So I'm going to say 11%, which I think is pretty huge of the world. Is that even close?
No.
Wow. What, more or less?
More, much more.
Much. Oh, okay. That's one of those silly numbers.
It is a silly number. Do you want to have another go, or do you want to be?
Yeah, I'll throw in 37. But if it's more than 37, I'll be astounded.
It's 80%.
No.
80% of the sea life found in the cool waters of the Great Southern Reef around Australia lives nowhere else on Earth and is unique to that ecosystem, which is incredible. It truly is incredible. As I said, the Great Barrier Reef gets a lot of the fame and publicity. But the good news is the Great Southern Reef is easily accessible from anywhere, basically south of Brisbane to Kalbarri in WA, which is north of Perth. So if you live, statistically speaking, if you're an Australian, you live somewhere along the Great Southern Reef. So get out there, have a look, see what we got, because I bet you almost certainly would not find it anywhere else on Earth, which is pretty freaking cool.
That's amazing. No, well, obviously, by my guess, it wasn't even close.
Now, this one, I'm hoping you'll be pretty close to. The other ones, these were tricky. I'll give you that. This is a tough one. But the last question is, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is huge. What country is it comparable in size to?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a great question. I'm just mentally trying to. New Zealand's my first thought. Just sort of transplanting what I'm thinking of in the map. I mean, England's or UK's always one that they throw in, but that seems. Although
the UK and New Zealand are pretty similar size.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm going to stick with my my guess of New Zealand.
Okay, so if we the UK and New Zealand are a pretty similar size. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but they're pretty comparable. The United Kingdom, Switzerland, and the Netherlands combined, the Great Barrier Reef is bigger than. It is roughly the same size as Japan, Malaysia, or Italy, which is way bigger than I would have thought.
Wow.
Way bigger. My first thought when I read this was, it's probably New Zealand. Because New Zealand's, it's not small. Like that's,
no, exactly.
That's pretty big. On a human scale, that's pretty bloody big.
Yeah.
Nope. It is way bigger. So I know we have a lot of Japanese listeners. So next time you're walking from one end of Japan to the other, as you do, I want you to realize that is how big the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is. It is that huge. Of course, the marine park is bigger than the reef itself, but to give you a sense of scale, it's absolutely phenomenally massive. So I'm going to apologize to you because these were some very, very difficult questions.
Good questions. It's sometimes it's fun. Well, sometimes it's nearly always fun to be astounded, and to be astounded 3 questions in a row. Well done. They're good questions.
Thank you very much. These were tricky, and I don't think I would have got any of these either. Maybe the first one, but maybe, but only because I've covered it before. So, yeah, some incredible stuff there.
Yeah.
All right. On that, thank you so much for joining us for another Australia Talks. If you have any feedback or suggestions for topics, please get in touch with us on our email at australiatalks@proton.me. We'd also be grateful if you could subscribe and give us an honest review, as this helps us out immensely. But the best thing that you can do for the show is just share it with a friend that you think might like it. Otherwise, join us next week for another episode of Australia Talks. As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to tell your mum I love her.
Thank you, DK.